All right, good afternoon, everyone. I have to make an observation first. In 24 years in the Secret Service, I've been trained to be very observant, and I've noticed a lot of very interesting socks today. But I think if we had a prize for the best socks, it would go to Charles, our last moderator. I don't know if Charles is in the room, but those socks were. I am not nearly that brave, at least in the way I dress. It's hard enough to put on a striped shirt for me. But just a little bit of background about me. I have been in the Secret Service for 24 years. I've traveled the world, had a fantastic time. I spent 2.5 years in Moscow, Russia, working for the Secret Service. My title was attaché. It was a very interesting time. When I was a very young man, I studied politics and geography of the Soviet Union in college. I took Russian language classes in college. I think that my professor in Russian language was a Soviet emigre to the United States who was so happy, I think, to be in the United States that we all got A's. And so when I got there, I was didn't quite have the language skills that I probably should have had when I got there. But it was a very interesting time. So my job in the Secret Service in Moscow was there were three primary areas of responsibility. One was cybercrimes investigations, counterfeit currency investigations, and of course the protection of the President of the United States, Vice President, any other person that we protect who might go to Russia. And then conversely, if the Russian president traveled to the United States, I was also involved in the protection of him when he was in the United States. So I never imagined when I was even back in college that I would ever be able to stand in the middle of Red Square and look around and see the sights that I was afraid of when I was a teenager. And so I went to Russia, desiring to do a good job, but I think I was probably slightly ill-prepared for what to expect. And so I started to listen very carefully to my Russian colleagues. I worked on cybercrimes issues with the successor agency to the KGB, the Interior Ministry, which is a about 212-year-old organization now that traces their origin to the Tsarist times. They're still the primary law enforcement agency in Russia. And the Federal Protective Service, which is another former part of the KGB that is now its own entity. So as I was listening to them and trying to negotiate predominantly cybercrimes cases with them, I started to learn a few things that I didn't really realize about Russia that I needed to know in order to get things done. And I think these are helpful. These three things are helpful for anyone trying to do any kind of business in Russia. One, Russia's old. They trace their roots back about 1,000 years. Now, not as old as some cultures, correct, but compared to the United States, that's pretty darn old. And they never missed a chance to remind me as an American how impetuous, impatient, and naive I was in regard to my negotiations with them. So it's helpful to keep that in mind. Moscow itself is 860 years old this year. They're celebrating 860 years. It's hard to imagine as an American, a city being that old. So they desire respect essentially right out of the gate because of their experience in the world. And they are very interested in their history. They know their history. And part of that history, which is point number 2 or lesson number 2 that I learned, is that they've been attacked from all sides, right? Everybody knows Russian history. The Swedes, the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Turks, they've been attacked from within, the Bolsheviks. They've been attacked by their friends. Stalin was allegedly, Hitler was allegedly their friend. And then, of course, from the inside, who can forget nearly 25 million Russians killed by Stalin himself is the figure that is probably most commonly accepted. And so there's a certain paranoia within Russia, particularly with those who are in the government, that requires a very deep level of trust that you don't get just because you show up and knock on their door and ask for a meeting, right? And so Somebody asked me a few minutes ago about vodka in Russia. And I would say a lot of that trust that I earned from them was over drinking a lot of vodka. And we laugh about that and joke about that, and it's funny, but I remember a time one of my Russian colleagues, a colonel in the Interior Ministry, invited me every year to their agency's birthday celebration. And his squad, he investigated counterfeit currency cases, a lot of counterfeit dollars in Russia. And I remember one time, 7 hours, we were in a restaurant with his squad, drinking vodka, eating. They were so hospitable to me. I was the only foreigner that they ever invited to these anniversaries. I went 4 times over the course of 4 years. It was a great relationship. And I don't think I could have developed that relationship without drinking vodka with him and his colleagues. So you have that age, you have the fact that they've been attacked from all sides, and that is very deeply ingrained in Russian culture. This suspicion of outsiders, and then 3. This one to me is one of the most interesting aspects that I learned. Is they're a nation of superlatives. Okay, so most of us know Russia's the biggest country land-wise in the world, 6.6 million square miles. That's pretty big. It covers 11 time zones, 9 if you count a traditional method. They went to 9 in 2010, and then in 2014 they decided 9 wasn't enough. They went back to 11 time zones. Let's see, some other superlatives of Russia. Well, of course, Moscow is the largest city in Europe, over 14 million people. Russia has the largest, deepest, and purest freshwater lake in the world, Lake Baikal, which is in the east. Fully 1/5 of the world's freshwater surface water is in Lake Baikal. Wouldn't we like to have that here in California? That's a lot of water. It's a big lake. It's over a mile deep. They have the largest forested area in the world, second only to the Amazon in the amount of CO2 that it processes. It's huge. They have the tallest mountain in Europe, Mount Elbrus, which is in the Caucasus. Even the czars built the biggest cannon and the biggest bell. Neither one of them worked. The first time they rang the bell, it cracked, and it sits inside the Kremlin walls as a testament to what Russia can do. And so, what do these things tell us about how we do business, and how I was able to do business in Russia? One, you need to go in understanding certain things about them that are very important to them. One, respect. Quite frankly, they deserve it on a number of levels. Well, one thing that I forgot to mention about their superlatives is they are the most educated country as far as college level and master's levels degrees. Fully 55% of Russian citizens have college level or higher degrees, primarily in the science, technology, engineering, math areas. And so another superlative for them, does anybody know what the second largest or second most used language on the internet is? Of course, it's Russian. It's probably not going to be that way forever. These Chinese, right, is probably going to be surpass them at some point. But between the educational part of things, the Russian hackers are really probably some of our biggest adversaries. And that was one of the things that I had to focus on, was interacting with my Russian colleagues regarding going after or pursuing hackers who had attacked Russia or American interests. I am just about out of time, but I will tell you one quick story. So the lessons I learned were to be persistent with them, to demonstrate respect and to be persistent with them. You need to be patient. They will wait you out, but if there's a way that they can make money if there's a way that it can be in their interest, if you can work these angles so that they want to do what you want them to do, they'll do it, and they'll generally do it well. So quick story. There was a Russian hacker who was involved in hack into a credit card processing company. This is well known back in 2008. And I and the FBI, my FBI colleague, had been pinging the FSB for months to go after this guy in St. Petersburg. And they weren't really interested because there were no Russian companies that were affected by this particular hack. But because of our relationships with them, because of our persistence and our patience with them, they eventually moved on this hacker in St. Petersburg. And what they did was they picked him up. They seized all of his hard drives, his computers, et cetera. This was 2009. And they gave me a call and they said, hey, we've got all this stuff. We think we have 10 terabytes of data. This is 2009. They said, there's no way we can image this or even begin to analyze it. Do you want it? I'm like, is this a joke? Do I want it? So we brought in some of our computer forensics examiners from New York and from DC. We spent 3 days, 72 hours in a hotel room in St. Petersburg and just grinded out imaging. It ended up to be about 8 terabytes of data that we were able to take back with us and to analyze and to demonstrate some success with going after this particular hacker. So thank you very much for your time today. I'll be around if anybody has any questions for me. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.